Hi, I'm Emily Olson, and today I'm going to be showing you how I use a variety of hard and soft edges to achieve depth in a watercolor painting. This adorable swimming golden retriever is the subject for my painting today, and when you look at the photo, you can actually see there's quite a variety of textures. There's the water surface, which creates some really interesting hard lines. There's the stick in the dog's mouth. It's kind of bumpy, right? And then the fur in his head and ears look super soft. With watercolor, you have to plan ahead for not only your lights and darks, but also your hard and soft edges. Now you might be wondering, what is the importance of edges? Can't you just paint a yellow dog on blue water and call it good? Well, yes, you could, but a variety of edges skillfully designed will help some areas of the painting recede and other areas to pop forward. Without these effects, a painting can oftentimes look flat, almost like paper cutouts. And since watercolor by its very nature tends to form hard edges, we need to use a variety of techniques like wet on wet, blending, and softening to create soft edges in watercolor. So that's where we're headed with this painting. Really quick, let's talk about supplies. I'm using a Blick Artist watercolor block. This is 140-pound cold pressed paper, size 7 by 10 inches. Something I really love about this block is that unlike a lot of watercolor blocks, it actually shows instructions for how to use it. Sometimes when you're beginning with watercolors, there's some tricky supplies. I remember when I first got my first watercolor block, I had no idea what to do with it. I thought, well, do you take it off before you paint? So it was nice to see that the block actually has instructions. Then I'm also using my Blick painter's tape. It's just the best. It comes in a variety of colors and sizes. And so I've sized this down to 6 by 9 inches for my composition. And when I take the tape off, it'll make some nice pretty edges. I'm also using my Mary Blue paints. I'll be using Primary Yellow, Burnt Sienna, Quinacridone Lake, Cobalt Blue Deep, and Ivory Black. And I'm using a set of Blick exclusive Princeton Aqua Elite Finest Synthetic Kolinsky watercolor brushes. I probably won't be using the dagger brush today, but I definitely plan on using the round brush size 4, size 10, and the oval wash, which is a 1/2 inch. Your supplies can actually make or break your painting, especially when you're trying to achieve certain effects with watercolor. So I definitely recommend using high quality cotton watercolor paper, good brushes, and good paints for the best results. Now, as you can see, I've already sketched on my golden retriever, and I've left a couple of spots untouched with lines. So I didn't sketch everything. It would be easy to just kind of outline the whole head and everything that you see in the reference photo, but instead I left the top of the stick totally blank. I left a couple of gaps along the line of the head, just enough little dashes so I can kind of see the outside dimension of the head shape, and I left some blank spaces on the dog's back as well. Those are where I want to place my soft edges. I want those things, like the top of the head and the stick, to look like they're turning backwards in space and receding. So those are areas where I want to put soft or lost edges. So as we work on our painting, I'll talk more about how to achieve those effects. So to start out, I'm going to begin with some soft washes for the background water, and I need to do both the dog's head and the water at the same time if I want to achieve that connectedness in edges along the head. So I'm going to need to mix up 2 different colors, the color for the base layer for our dog and a nice soft bluish gray for my background. And I'll be using my larger brush for that. This is the 1/2 inch oval wash. So I'm dipping my brush in the water, and I'm going to create a little puddle over here. This will be for my blue water, and then over here I'm going to create a mix for the dog's head. I'm going to start with my primary yellow, and in fact, because most of the edges that are going to be lost along the top of the head are quite a light shade of yellow, I'm not going to need a very dark value. It can just be a nicely tinted wash. So I'll start with a little yellow, mix in a tiny bit of the burnt sienna, and I'm going to set that down for a second and mix up a separate color with my size 10 round brush, using the Cobalt Deep first of all. And that's a beautiful color all on its own. I almost don't need to add much to this, but I'm going to need to mix up plenty of paint to cover this whole area, this whole background. So to dull the color down a tiny bit, I can add a little of my burnt sienna, and you can see how that grays out the color. So just make sure you're mixing up enough paint to cover the area that you wish to cover. One of the worst things ever is when you run out of your mix that you worked so hard on. You just run out of paint and realize it didn't stretch far enough. Once I have enough paint that I feel confident I can cover the whole thing, I'm actually going to start by wetting my paper surface. And for that, I'm going to use a natural sponge. So I'll dip my sponge in the clean water, soaking it up nice and thoroughly. And then I'm going to go ahead and just paint the whole background with water using my sponge. You could also use a brush, but I've already loaded mine up with paint, so this will be more efficient, I think. Now, areas I might want to avoid with the water would be the top of the stick, for example. But even that, because again, I want to have kind of a lost edge there, I'm going to cover it with water for now. And I'm going to focus on just the top portion of the painting for this initial wash. And we can do the bottom part of the painting a little bit later. All right, so once you've soaked your paper, it should be glossy and damp, ready to take some paint. You can go ahead and start painting in your water. I'm going to take my cobalt mix right here and start dropping that in. You can see it's this beautiful light, kind of grayish blue, just perfect for what we need right now. And I do want to take this edge to edge pretty much. Now, when I get up to the dog, I'm going to watch out for the dog and just paint around his head. Because we pre-wet the paper, we'll get a nice soft edge there. This is one of the best ways to achieve soft edges, is using the wet on wet technique. We're painting with wet paint on a wet surface, and I love how the cobalt blue just granulates. Granulation is when it creates kind of this pebbly effect. It's a certain quality some pigments have. Cobalt blue, ultramarine, burnt sienna, they all have that granulation. And it's really great for things like water, fur, rock. All right, so before this dries, I need to switch to my brush that's loaded with the yellow and go ahead and paint in the dog's fur right along my pencil line. And I can paint this all the way into the dog's face. And look at that perfect soft edge on the top of the head. I want to try to retain that feel through this painting of softness there. In subsequent layers, I want to be careful not to lose that nice soft edge. And I can take the yellow right over the stick. In fact, I love how the blue is kind of just seeping into the stick right there, also creating a soft edge. And so the stick is going to look like it's just turning back in space. It's exactly what we want. All right, if you have enough paint to work with, you can continue taking your blue-gray into the lower half of the painting. If you want to pre-wet it, you can do that. Edges are not important right now. This is all just getting some color down to get started. So I'm taking my size 10 round brush and just painting in everywhere I see blue water. This is going to represent the lightest value in the whole painting. Watercolor will dry lighter, so if it appears a bit dark to you right now, don't worry, it will dry lighter. Now resist the temptation to mess with it. Let it dry all the way before we begin our next layer. Once your surface is totally dry, you can start painting darker details. For the shadows on the stick and the dog's dark reflection on the water, I use the wet on dry technique. This technique is the most intuitive and easy to master watercolor skill because it's so straightforward. Just mix up the correct colors and values and paint them very directly onto the dry paper. I switched to the size 4 round brush for these smaller details, working carefully to paint inside of my pencil lines. When you paint on dry paper, your edges will all be hard edges. This is so great when you want to achieve perfect, rigid details. Your paint will just stay put. For the dog, however, I do not want my brush strokes to be tight and rigid. There needs to be a softness there to faithfully represent the dog's fur. So once again, I use the wet on wet technique, using clear water to paint the surface first, before dropping in my darker paint. I usually paint animals in 3 to 5 layers, slowly building up color and value, working light to dark. When I want my dark areas to soften a little, but not totally spread all over, I need to use thicker, creamier paint on my brush and very little water. The thicker your paint is, the slower it will flow. You already have water on the surface of your paper, so if you bring more water into the painting with your brush, you can expect the paint to flow a lot faster and with less control. Different wetness levels on your surface and in your brush will yield different results. Once you've built up soft washes with those initial layers of color, you can then add the final dark, wet on dry details that will really make your painting something special. I tend to save the eyes, nose, and mouth to the very end because it's like the icing on the cake. These dark details really help the dog come to life. So there is our finished swimming golden retriever. You can see we got a lovely combination of soft edges and really hard edges. And the areas where we left lost edges or soft edges tend to be pushed back and to recede into the painting, and the hard edges really come forward. So here you can really see the power of soft edges and hard edges and just the amazing effects you can achieve with that. So if in doubt, just remember wet on wet for soft edges, wet on dry for hard edges. Soft edges recede, hard edges come forward. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Thanks so much for watching today.